BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. The first thing that I would like to say is, as always, if you like this upload, you can hit the like button. If you haven't subscribed yet, you're welcome to do so. But most importantly, please drop some comments in the section below at the end of the upload so we can continue the discussion. And we also have an Instagram page for this show, BlackBoxNed88 on Instagram. One more time, BlackBoxNed88. If you follow the show on Instagram, you'll get access to a special bonus podcast talking about music, movies, daily life, and more. All subjects fair game, BlackBoxNed88 on Instagram. We are revisiting the case of Charles Manson today. And this is one, though, that Thomas Horan described it as, once you get pulled into the world of Charles Manson, you will never get out of. And I really have to agree with that. Last night, I had an opportunity to watch the film Charlie Says, which is, it's a rather interesting film. We had a free trial of Showtime going on, and that was one of the movies available, and I was just like, I can't resist that one. But with this film, it's one of the few films that I've watched that truly explores the concept of what is it like to undo brainwashing. Yeah, there are a lot of movies out there that talk about brainwashing, but to have three people who used to be members of the Manson family and showing the process of removing the layers of brainwashing and trying to get them to renounce the person who was their cult leader. I think that it's just it's a very good material for a film if you get a chance to watch it. It also features the British actress Hannah Murray, who it took me a while to remember her name, but I was like, oh yes, I do know her. She was one of the cast members of the teen drama Skins from the UK, if you ever saw that one. And she is in the film Charlie Says. She's actually more or less the lead actress in this film. So it was definitely very entertaining. And while we don't do traditional movie reviews, what I would say is that, it's just, it's somewhat valuable, but at the same time, I'm also a daily listener to the Stones Unturned podcast with Thomas Henry Horan, and he explores the Tate LaBianca murders, Charles Manson, and all of these things. And his major argument is that there was this type of cult that was looming in the shadows. And that with Charles Manson, you're going to see the popular narrative that these are some people that ended up on a ranch, they're doing some drugs, they were having lots of sex, and just that's the end of it. But what his argument is that there was this cult that was intercepting various different cells around the country that had a lot of different things going on, and it was something that was looming in the shadows. I can't even say too much about that because, I just need a little bit more time with his material before we could compose an accurate response. But I would always like to remind you that you can check out the Stones Unturned podcast, their series, The Tate LaBianca Murders. The Tate LaBianca Murders. That's how it's presented. That's how it's titled rather than presented. What do we make of Charles Manson? I would say in this film, they really wanted to focus in on the concept of a cult leader uses love to manipulate people. A cult leader uses love. And we talked about this when we laid out our 3 signs of a cult leader, that the first thing they do is discredit the ways of the past, produce a new way, and then they tell you that there's something missing in your life, and then the only way to get it is by following their teachings. If you get a chance to watch the film Charlie Says, you will see that method played out 100%. It is so textbook. And very specifically, when I learned those 3 signs of a cult leader, it was coming from a discussion from someone saying that the people will use love as an absolute form of manipulation. And it is so present in these cult leaders. And when they say love, they aren't talking so much about divine love or God is love in that sense. They're talking about human love, like your parents do not love you, but I do. And that's exactly how Charles Manson was interacting in this film with these people. He's sort of doing all of those things like, if their parents love them, would they do this to them? But I will bring love upon them. And they also explored the concept of how it could very well be the popular narrative that Charles Manson was somebody who really wanted a record deal and he saw musicians with their groupies and thought, if I'm going to be a rock star, I need an entourage of women, maybe even a few men, but I need these people adoring me, and that's how this cult blew out of control. The counterbalance to that is that this is something that actually runs much deeper, and that anybody who's associated with the music industry is going to have a little bit of a connection into some very dark circles. We've even explored this on this channel when we talked about the connections between Kanye West and the Illuminati. Granted, I am very, very critical of some things about that, but this is a very big narrative when they're just trying to say that Charles Manson was actually connected to almost a shadow network. And I think that's perhaps the way we can describe this type of cult leader presence that was going on. You actually have many different cult cells across the country. And I would really like to learn more about the connections between the Manson family and the Son of Sam and David Berkowitz and all that. Where really are the facts in that? And what really is this type of shadow network cult that is infiltrating all these different aspects of America? Charles Manson was someone who really wanted to indoctrinate a lot of ideas into his people, into his followers. And if you do get a chance and you want to hear something about the early life of Charles Manson, I highly recommend you check out our 4-part series on the early life of Charles Manson. I'll post a link to that in the description box. It is a direct response to Stephanie Harlow's channel, but, we challenged some things, and she even came over onto my uploads to leave some comments and to just say some words of encouragement. Once again, we have a 4-part series that covers the early life of Manson. But there's one thing that I do not think that I said in those uploads, and that is the concept of humiliation. Like, we talked about how Charles Manson was forced to wear a dress to school by one of his uncles. And I don't know if I said this in those uploads. I'm pretty sure I didn't, though. There's a book that we had to read in the 4th grade. It was actually, for this section, I remember it was one of the few times that our teacher would read the book to us. And with this one, like, the teacher actually, just did, we're kind of sitting in a semicircle in the 4th grade, and the teacher's reading the book. And it was called How to Be a Perfect Person in Just 3 Days. And the thing that the kid has to do in the book is he has to wear a piece of broccoli around his neck and goes to school, and everybody is just laughing at him. And I think about that when I hear the story of Charles Manson was forced to wear a dress to school by his uncle, and everyone was humiliating him. And the reason why you do this is you conquer the concept of humiliation. And I see that so much in Charles Manson, especially the way they were portraying him in the film Charlie Says, when the whole thing that also Stephanie Harlow really wanted to zone in on, people would try to ruffle his feathers as an adult prior to being put away in prison for life. People were trying to aggravate him. Prison guards would try to taunt him, and they just couldn't do it. And the reason why I think about what I was just describing is he is someone who probably had conquered humiliation as a kid. So it's like, you can't really do anything worse to me. I've already been there. And there's a scene in the film Charlie Says where one of the members of the Manson family, her name was Lulu, Leslie VanHouten. Her biography was the source material for this film. Like, there's a scene where she is trying to leave, or some guy says, I'm going to get you out of this family. And Charles Manson is just sitting back. He's like, all right, go. You're free to leave. And she chooses not to leave. It doesn't bother him at all. He is not going to just erupt in rage over something like that. But they definitely do show some things where Charles Manson would break out into rage when, say, for example, he could not get his record deal that he truly wanted. Charles Manson definitely is somebody who wanted to be a performing musician. The question is, was there another influence in his life that was pushing him down this dark pathway? On the stones unturned, I'd say that the most valuable takeaway that I've heard talking about the Manson family and the Sharon Tate murders is that the biggest pieces of source material that we have come from the Manson family themselves. Look at this film, how it was based on the biography, not autobiography, the biography of Leslie VanHouten, who went by Lulu in the Manson family. It was really covering 3 different people in the Manson family, Lulu, Sadie, and Katie. And they're just trying to pull them out of the Manson family. And some things we did say in our 4-part series is that Charles Manson was telling them that they're going to turn into fairies and they're going to grow their wings. And then someone asked the character Katie, well, what do you think is going to happen? And just because someone asks her, what does she think? She's like, oh, well, I don't know what's really going to happen. That whole concept of they've been followers so long. And I repeat, followers as well as believers. But it's really interesting to look at the concept of how we're only getting this stuff from people who were in the Manson family. That is just one side of the story. And if Charles Manson is somebody who is also interacting with Dennis Wilson from the Beach Boys, as well as countless other individuals from these dark circles, then it's very possible that there are other sides of the story that have been neglected. So that's one thing. Another thing that is very big to note. When I first learned that one of the people involved with the Sharon Tate murders was Abigail Folger, and you'll recognize the name Folger from Folger's Coffee. She was the heiress to the Folger's Coffee fortune. I was simply just asking myself the question, why isn't that more talked about? Why isn't that more well known? And Thomas Horan does get into that on the Stones Unturned about some possible things between, well, he likes to tie things into either the CIA or the FBI, and it's possible that there were connections between the Folger family and the FBI, because with the coffee industry, look at what goes on in Central America, and this also brings in the CIA and typical super conspiracy model, if you're going to go down that pathway. And I have to be very critical of anyone who's going to be talking about this type of shadowy cult-like conspiracy, because this is the most basic concept of a conspiracy theory, that there is this type of dark underlying network that is manipulating actions. If that's true, all right, that's true. I'll accept it when we have the proof. But at the same time, if there is this dark underlying shadowy group of individuals that are doing things behind the scenes, we aren't necessarily sure of their existence yet. We're going to investigate this one in the future, because that's what we have to do. We just have to investigate. In the film, Charlie says what they really wanted to do was, they wanted to push the narrative that Charles Manson was interacting with an individual named Terry Melcher, a music producer. And then it turned out that Charles Manson and Terry Melcher were not going to strike a deal. Melcher did not want to sign Manson, or he wasn't that impressed with Charlie Manson. So then, one of the things that the Manson family was doing was they were not targeting their victims at random. What the film was insinuating, and I repeat, insinuating, is that Charles Manson was going after Terry Melcher, and he wanted, in short, revenge. And he goes to a house where he believes that Terry Melcher would have been living. And it's actually Charlie Manson himself who knocks on the door, and he sees Sharon Tate. She answers the door, and he is just like very captivated by her presence, very intrigued and overwhelmed by Sharon Tate, and he develops an infatuation with her, and that was something that led to the Sharon Tate murders. Now, what do we have to say about that? I mean, I can't even really criticize that theory too much, because that is something that is very basic, it is very ordinary, and I really would have to give credit to the side that just says that's just only going off of things that the Manson family would have talked about themselves. And a big thing is, Sharon Tate was murdered, Abigail Folger was murdered, so they can't give their side of the story. Is it suspicious that Sharon Tate's husband, film director Roman Polanski, was not present there? I don't necessarily know. Is it, one of the points, though, that I would say, though, is, if you do get a chance to watch this film, they're talking about the character of Tex Watson, the individual Tex Watson, we should say, because he's more than a character, a real person. They were portraying him in a rather odd light. I would say that the film, The Haunting of Sharon Tate, which featured Hilary Duff playing Sharon Tate, portrayed Tex Watson in somewhat more of the way that I would kind of imagine him, because Tex Watson is somebody who starts out as a rather, ordinary, balanced individual. But through the use of drugs, he had a very adverse reaction that really fried his brain. And on The Stones Unturned, Thomas Horan was really trying to question some of the actions of Tex Watson. Now, why would he do that? That doesn't make any sense. Well, he went through a very big personality transformation and had genuine brain damage. I mean, you want to try and unravel the thinking of a brain damaged individual who is very, very extreme now? I don't know how valuable that would necessarily be. If you do get a chance to hear the Stones Unturned podcast, the Tate LaBianca murders, I would say, when I first heard Thomas Horan talk about the Zodiac Killer, I was like, well, I can definitely see the value in what he's doing. When I first heard him talk about the Manson family and the Sharon Tate murders, I was like, wait a second, I am not convinced at all. I mean, I think that possibly he could be going down the wrong pathway, trying to link this to the CIA, the FBI, as well as the Polish espionage networks, which Abigail Folger's boyfriend, partner, for lack of a better term, was Wojciech Frykowski, who was a close friend and former roommate of Roman Polanski, and saying that Roman Polanski and Frykowski had deep connections to the Polish espionage networks, and then the CIA, the FBI, wanted information from them. They would have definitely been under surveillance. Okay, I'll accept it when we have the proof. And we're going to keep learning about some of that material because I just want to investigate to know where is the truth in something like that. And I can accept that, the CIA is probably going to have some interactions with Peter Folger, the father of Abigail Folger. They're going to have interactions with the Folger family if they're in Folger's coffee, once again dealing with all those parts of the world that the CIA would later use for stomping grounds in the future. But the real question is Charles Manson connected to any of that? Or is he simply some guy who would go through Ashbury Hate, treat himself like the gardener, trying to cultivate the minds and the hearts of people, giving them the love that they never had from their families because he wanted to be around a lot of women that he could have sex with, and that he wanted to be around people that would adore him and listen to him play his guitar. I would say, though, Stephanie Harlow really talked about how she did not believe that Charles Manson was that good of a guitarist, and I think they wanted to highlight that in the film because I hope that's what they were trying to do. Like the actor that's playing Charles Manson's playing the guitar and singing in the film Charlie Says from 2018. I was like, wow, that doesn't sound very good. I'm almost certain that would be intentional. It's like, he sounds all right. I mean, it's, that note there, that doesn't sound too good. So they're really trying to say Charles Manson had this dream of being a rock star, but he wasn't that good of a musician. And this ties into some other things that we mentioned in our 4-part series. Once again, I would definitely invite you to check out our 4-part playlist on Charles Manson, and that's going to be available in the description box there, talking about the early life of Charles Manson and how he came to be. And you can also visit Stephanie Harlow's channel, as well as The Stones Unturned, the Tate LaBianca murders, that's the name of their series, and we were referencing the film Charlie Says from 2018. Is there any deep connection to Charles Manson and the CIA? I don't feel convinced, and I even feel like it's kind of going down some dark, murky waters, meaning that it's trying to use the model of how there is this type of conspiracy in the dark that is just going to give you all the answers to everything. That is a very difficult narrative to prove. Now, you want to say something like there could be a link between David Berkowitz and Charles Manson? All right, I'm listening. That's not an outrageous claim. I would definitely like to learn more about that in the Son of Sam murders, as well as just simply exploring the concept of Charles Manson was not just some guy that was living on a ranch and he had a bunch of followers and he was trying to have sex with them and then he had brainwashed them all. There could be a little bit more going on there, and it turns out that this is actually part of a larger connection, or that there are some other sinister forces at play, because you do see that the Manson family is a little bit more complicated than the mainstream media would have you believe. Well, that's all for me now. What do you have to say? What do you think about Charles Manson? I hope you'll check out some of the sources that we've talked about, as well as our own 4-part series here. And I will see you guys on Instagram for the IGTV podcast, and that's all for me now. Until next time.